Major funding for Election 2022 Arkansas PBS Debates is provided by AARP Arkansas, with additional funding provided by the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce.
From the campus of University of Central Arkansas and the studios of Arkansas PBS, it's Election 2022 Arkansas PBS U.S. House of Representatives District 3 debate.
Stand by, Jim, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, up on Jim and cue Steve.
Hello again, everyone, and thanks very much for being with us. Welcome to Debate Week here on Arkansas PBS. At this hour, the candidates for Arkansas Congress from the 3rd District, the candidates in alphabetical order. The Libertarian candidate, Michael Kalagias, the Democratic candidate, Lauren Mallett-Hays, and the incumbent Republican nominee, Steve Womack. The questions for the debate will be coming from Una Lee of 4029 News, Fort Smith and Fayetteville, Christina Munoz of Arkansas PBS and Natural State Update, and I'm Steve Barnes. The rules for the debate have been agreed upon by all of the candidates, and they are: each nominee will have 1 minute to respond to questions. Each will have 30 seconds to rebut if they choose to use those 30 seconds. At the conclusion of questioning, each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement. Now, the order of candidate introductions, appearances was determined prior to the broadcast in a drawing that was overseen by the candidates or their representatives. Our first question of the debate comes now from Ms. Lee, and it goes first to Congressman Womack.
Congressman Womack, Northwest Arkansas is seeing rapid growth. We have very specific needs in our region. We need more housing. We need bigger roads. How do we address this issue in Washington?
Well, it's a great question because everybody that lives pretty much in the 3rd District, but certainly in the extreme northwest part of our state, understands that we have about 30 plus people a day moving into the area. And how do you cope with that kind of growth? You know, I have a background as a mayor. I was the mayor of Rogers for 12 years, as a lot of people know. And so I was right in the middle of all of that growth projection, and it continues to this day. What you have to have is you have to have a good strategy, and I think the Northwest Arkansas community has a pretty good strategy for how do we develop, where are these road networks going to be, what are we going to be able to do insofar as funding a lot of these particular issues. And, you know, fortunately, the people of Northwest Arkansas and in Arkansas in general with issue 1 have taxed themselves to be able to provide for a lot of this infrastructure. But you're still going to need a federal partner. You're still going to have to be able to do things like build a bridge over the Arkansas River and finish 13 miles of I-49 and 412 in Northwest Arkansas. Still a lot of work to be done, and we have to have the funding to do it, and the federal partner is going to be necessary.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Mallett-Hays, 1 minute.
So we know that the growth in Northwest Arkansas is projected to be 1 million by 2046. We continue to talk about infrastructure and the needs there, and we have passed a bipartisan bill to bring money into the state for that development. But one key piece that we're missing is public transportation in the form of commuter rail. I think connecting the Northwest Arkansas corridor to Fort Smith and then on down to Little Rock will be a significant improvement for our area as far as the rapid growth we're going to see. When you look at the cost of living compared to other metropolitan areas that have a much better public transportation system, comparatively the cost is the same, and yet we don't have the same access. So my biggest responsibility would be to help build and figure out how we get that public transportation into the Northwest Arkansas River Valley region.
Thank you, Mr. Kalagias.
Yeah, I have seen Northwest Arkansas pretty much explode in growth, and it has been tough to keep up with that growth. Most of that, as far as infrastructure goes and roads go, we can meet that with taxes that we're already paying. So we do have fuel taxes that should be going strictly to roads, and oftentimes it doesn't. It goes to build airplane hangars at executive airports, or it goes to, you know, build buildings somewhere instead of going into the actual infrastructure and the roads and bridges where it's needed. So some of that we can clean up that way. We will have to see as more and more electric cars get on the road, find a way that make sure that they're also paying their fair share, however that goes, and I'm sure that could be debated in the halls of Congress on how we want to do that. But Northwest Arkansas isn't the only place that's struggling with this. So, and especially when it comes to housing. Housing is getting tight everywhere. So, and a lot of that is because the government keeps getting in the way. We have so many different restrictions on who can build where and how much it has to, how big it has to be and what features it has to have and how many permits you have to get. And
I have to call time here,
okay.
so excuse me. Congressman, you have 30 seconds now.
Look, we spent a lot of time on the entire infrastructure debate talking about roads and bridges and normal trafficability. But one thing we don't spend a lot of time talking about is kind of hidden out there, and that is what to do with a real growth inhibitor, and that's how to deal with wastewater. And that's an area that I have studied quite a bit, and frankly, how we treat point source pollution, non-point source pollution, how do we satisfy the EPA, because a lot of this effluent is draining into the river basins that constitute our navigable waterways and our water supply. So we have to spend a little time talking about that as well, because that could cause us to have to stop growth completely.
Ms. Mallett-Hays, you have another 30 seconds.
Mike hit a good point when we're talking about affordable housing. That has been one of the bigger issues when we're talking to constituents about how quickly the housing market has increased. And we have got to figure out, how do we improve affordable housing for people but still remain, keep other people's property value from being devalued by multifamily housing units.
All right, and Mr. Kalagias, 30 seconds.
A couple things. I know we talked about public transportation. And in Northwest Arkansas, we already have that as far as bus routes go, and there's no demand for it. So that's another one of those areas where we shouldn't be wasting money on something that won't get used. When it comes to wastewater, Fort Smith had a huge problem with that. They're paying a ton for that now. I know Mr. Womack was aware of that, but we didn't really do anything about it. I suggested we follow an example like what they did in Augusta, Georgia, but they weren't interested in that. It would have been a good idea. It would have saved a lot of money. So a lot of what we need to do is just make better decisions.
Well, thank you. Next question, Ms. Munoz.
Thank you very much. Who did it go to?
Oh, it goes to Ms. Mallett-Hays.
Ms. Mallett-Hays, thank you so much. So we're going to jump right into the economy. There's no doubt we are in an economic downturn. Inflation is a huge concern. What, in your opinion, is the best and fastest way to help not only the individual Arkansan, but Arkansas business owners as well? Ms. Mallett-Hays.
I think any way that we can put money back into the pockets of our hardworking citizens and reduce the cost for our businesses is going to be the most effective way. I would like to introduce a bill called OT40, which would allow for no taxation on overtime pay, commission type paychecks, and Social Security, to allow for working citizens and retired citizens to be able to have more funds in their pocket to be able to meet the needs that they have, whether it's paying their bills, putting a roof over their head. We can also look at the way that we are requiring the taxation of the businesses and what that we could bring down for them to reduce their cost as well.
Mr. Kalagias, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, the best way to stimulate the economy is tax breaks. So I can agree with you there. I think we need across-the-board tax breaks. I know my family, when I calculate it all up, we're paying about 50% of all of our income just goes to pay taxes. By the time you have your income taxes, your payroll taxes, your property taxes, your sales taxes, the fees that go on vehicles, taxes on food, it's overwhelming how much money you have to give up from what you earn. So, and we need to lower that tax burden, not just in income taxes, but across the board, in all taxes. But the only way you can do that, the only way you can lower taxes, is if you cut spending. So if you lower taxes without cutting spending, all you've done is shift the burden somewhere else. You haven't really lowered taxes. You've put it out on a future generation, you've shifted it to a different tax. The way to fix it is, one, you have to control your spending, cut the spending a lot. And once you cut spending, then you can responsibly cut the taxes so that people can have the money that they earned and put that into the economy.
Mr. Womack.
We're talking about inflation. And inflation is a simple problem. It is too much money chasing too few products. And the first thing that we have to do in Congress is quit spending so much money. I mean, we just spend, and that's the answer that a lot of my friends on the other side of the aisle want to do. They want to address every problem we have by throwing more money at it. We just simply can't afford to continue to spend at the rate we're spending. Inflation was at 8+ % in the last quarter. The core inflation, which is a better predictor of future inflation, is at 6.5%, and that's excluding food and energy. The other thing we have to do is everything is influenced by how much we spend on energy. And people are about to open their heating bills this cold winter. They're going to find out the reality of that. We need to unleash American resources, put America back into energy independence, because that's one of the ways that we can reduce the input costs that go into everything that we do in this economy.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Mallett-Hays, you have 30 seconds for follow-up.
I think it's no surprise to anybody that we're kind of in this situation following one of the worst pandemics that we've seen, the only pandemic we've seen in my lifetime. And so it's not surprising that we're seeing some of these problems. To help our businesses, though, we need to fix the broken supply chains that have been affected and also reduce the price gouging that we're seeing by corporations that are increasing costs for no need at this point.
Mr. Kalagias.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Mr. Womack on part of that the reason we have this inflation is because Congress keeps spending way too much money. The problem is that while he recognizes what the problem is, he hasn't done anything to solve it while he's been there. He's been in Congress for 12 years. We've never had anything close to a balanced budget, even when he was the budget chairman. So he's voted for every single debt limit increase that we've had since he's been in office. So we need someone that not only recognizes the problems, we need someone that's actually going to do something about it as well.
All right, Mr. Womack, 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, I was budget chairman, and I've got a front row seat to exactly what our challenges are, and I talked about it with our spending. But here's the other data point that I think a lot of people need to understand is for every 10 basis points of an increase in the interest rates that are a factor in this inflation struggle, is $22 billion more in debt service. So, I would agree if we had a chance to balance the budget, we should. I have served under mainly Democrat rule since I've been in Congress, either in the House or in the White House. So, look, both sides got to come together. This is not just a Republican issue or Democrat issue. This is an American issue. We've got to solve for the budget crisis in our balance sheet.
Got to call it there, sir. Next question goes first to Mr. Kalagias. We've all talked about inflation here. It is, in fact, global, is it not? The inflation rate in Europe, in the European countries, I think I checked a moment ago, and it was something along the lines of 11 or 12%. So is it more than just an American phenomenon? Are the forces more global than they are purely domestic?
There are some global forces. We exist in a global market. We are the most dominant force in that market. And so a lot of what we do, the rest of the world follows to a certain extent. And you'll see other countries are doing a lot of the same things. Their central banks dumped a lot of extra currency into their market, and dumping that currency into the market causes inflation, and we're paying for that now. As far as the global crisis for inflation goes, that's not really the realm of Congress necessarily to take care of. I can't fix what's going on in Europe. So our Congress works for the United States of America. We can fix what's going on here. We can quit borrowing money from the Fed. We can quit have deficit spending. We can start paying back some of what we've borrowed so that we can control our inflation here. And then if the rest of the world follows suit, that's great. But that's up to the rest of the world. That's not a job for our Congress.
Mr. Womack, 1 minute.
Yeah, well, it is a global problem. Inflation rages around the world, but for different reasons. I mean, in America, I think we could begin the process of fixing inflation if we just had the opportunity to unleash American resources here from an energy perspective. Everything that we do, our entire economic structure has energy kind of baked into it. So that's one thing we can do in America to lead, and that is quit relying on the global supply, because energy is kind of a global commodity, and be able to unleash those resources right here under our feet. And I think if we did a better job of that, we would be leading our way out of this recession, or at least begin the process of doing that. The other thing is we got a big war raging in Ukraine. We've got oppression in Iran and demonstrations going on there. So there's a lot of upheaval. This is not a very stable world we live in. And all of those things, I think, go to contribute to the inflationary spirals that are affecting the entire country.
Ms. Mallett-Hays.
Yes, this is definitely a global issue, and I'm glad Mr. Womack identified that as such, since he has been so dead set on blaming it on this current administration. Yes, we are seeing this because of the pandemic. Yes, because of the supply chain disruption worldwide throughout the pandemic, and economies are trying to get back on their feet. However, if we're only focusing on our oil industry, for our energy needs, we are missing the boat. That is a non-renewable resource. We are not setting the precedent for our children in the future. We have to come up with a cohesive solution that contains fossil fuel, green energy, and other ways that we can sustain our energy grids going into the future, because we are going to run out of the resources we currently have. And if we do not put focus on that now, we're going to be trying to play catch up.
Mr. Kalagias, 30 seconds to follow up.
It always is good if you can develop your domestic resources. For the most part, we already are producing everything that we need in this country. Much of what we import into this country as far as energy or oil goes is so that we can export it back out as a refined product. Oil is on a global market. It's priced on a global market. So increasing domestic production isn't necessarily going to have that big of a change here, depending on what the rest of the global market is doing. So we do need to concentrate on making sure that we have diverse domestic energy production. But once again, we can't be the savior for the rest of the world. A lot of the rest of the world, a lot of the global market is going to have to be taken care of by countries over there.
Mr. Womack, 30 seconds.
You know, there's not much more to add to it other than the fact that, as I said, it's an unstable world. And national security is a big piece of it. We have to continue to bolster national security so that we remain free and capable of doing the things that we do. Like I say, the energy issues that are facing this country right now are hitting everybody in the pocketbook, from what they do by putting gas in their car to the foods that they put on their table. It is and it doesn't have to be this way. We have the resources. All we have to do is bring those back to bear in the United States of America, and we can do it in a better and cleaner way than people around the globe.
And 30 seconds from Ms. Mallett-Hays.
I think I'm good.
All right, our next question then comes from Ms. Lee, and it goes first to Ms. Mallett-Hays.
Ms. Mallett-Hays, one of the problems that we're seeing is in our Social Security benefits and Social Security system. Last week, the government announced 8.7% bump in Social Security payments to adjust for inflation. There are recent reports coming out saying that Social Security is going to be in big trouble by 2034, as early as 2034. So how does a program sustain itself? What do we do now to find a solution to Social Security benefits?
Well, I think you're going to hear us revert back to the whole spending. I don't disagree with them that we need a balanced budget. We need to ensure that Social Security and Medicare stay solvent, and we do that by putting a priority on things that matter the most to most Arkansans and as well as Americans. I think we need to look at all of our systems and do a good run through and try to make them more efficient and see how we can save money there. I know there's a lot of systems that are still very clunky and inefficient and hard to use. And if we can focus on making those more efficient, we can save some labor costs there and put that money towards the Social Security and Medicare funds that we need.
And Mr. Kalagias, 1 minute.
Yeah, Social Security, we've known that's going to be in trouble for a while. It's not really anything new. It's kind of accelerating as far as how far we're going to get before it runs out of money. But one of the things we're going to have to do is try and make it so that it's solvent for the future. It should have been set up to where it was a retirement account. People feel like they paid into Social Security and they're entitled to that money, and they should feel that way. But unfortunately, what they paid in did not go into an account for them. It just went to pay for current beneficiaries. And so it's set up kind of like a Ponzi scheme, and those are designed to eventually fail. So what we need to do is change that. Change Social Security for future beneficiaries so that it becomes a defined contribution plan instead of a defined benefit plan. That way people actually are paying into their own account. The money will be there because they put it there. So as far as people that are currently expecting to get Social Security, that vested, they paid in all their lives, and they want to see that money, right now it's not there, which means we're going to have to find other places in the budget where we can cut so that we can pay the benefits promised to those that paid in their whole lives and now don't have another option to save for retirement.
Mr. Womack, 1 minute.
Well, it's kind of hard to isolate Social Security over by itself because it's one piece, and it's a large piece of what we call mandatory spending at the federal level. Discretionary spending 50 years ago was about a third, or was about 2/3 of government spending. Today it's about a third. So 2/3 of government spending is tied up with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the net interest on the debt, which is soaring right now. So what we have to do is we have to look at the structure of our entitlement program in whole. It's just hard to separate one like Social Security out. Medicare trust fund is going to run out in a couple of years. Social Security still has about 8 or so years left before we start having to do some emergency planning on it. But these are programs our people have paid into. These are programs our people rely on. So structural changes that both sides can come to the table and agree on is what's going to be necessary if we're going to save these programs for future generations.
All right, thank you, sir. Ms. Mallett-Hays, you have 30 seconds for a follow-up.
We've known these were going to be issues for the upcoming years for a while now, and yet we keep giving the same representatives the opportunity to make changes to these programs and to the funding, and we haven't seen that happen. Mr. Womack's been in Congress for 12 years, and I haven't seen much of any legislation that he's presented to tackle these problems. And while I can agree with what he's saying, I would like to see some action.
All right, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Kalagias, 30 seconds.
I'd like to echo the same thing. It is long past time for action. This isn't something that 8 years from now we need to worry about emergency. We know this is happening now. We've known it's happened for a while. We knew this was happening back in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan first raised the payroll taxes so that we could try and extend its life a little longer. It's not something new. It's something that should already have been addressed. It's something that we need to address now because previous generations have just been kicking the can down the road.
Mr. Womack, 30 seconds.
I don't think either of my opponents have been paying much attention. I was a budget chair in 2018, led the Joint Select Committee on Budget Process Reform. The last real budget that came out of the House Budget Committee, I'm talking a true budget that balanced in the 10-year window, was the budget I presented for FY19. And in that budget, we called for an increase in the age of eligibility for Medicare. It was small. It was from 65 to 67. But we couldn't get that budget put on the floor of the House of Representatives for a vote. So I put my money where my mouth is. I don't just talk a good game. I actually advocate for those kinds of solutions.
Our next question from Ms. Munoz, and it goes first to Mr. Kalagias.
Okay, so before we got ready for Debate Week, we offered the opportunity to our viewers to submit questions via social media. So this next question comes from a viewer in Pope County. Arkansans, like most Americans, are increasingly impacted by climate change-driven weather extremes like floods and drought. This is expensive and dangerous. What are your plans for reducing Arkansas emissions and boosting clean energy and conservation practices? Mr. Kalagias, to you first.
A lot of that has to be taken care of by the people themselves. A lot of this is going on at levels that federal involvement isn't helping at all. When we have mandates to go to electric cars, we're just shifting where the pollution comes from instead of actually reducing pollution. So we need to take local actions, clean up things locally, carpool, plant trees, quit tending lawns and tend gardens and grow trees instead. Those are small things that we can do. We already have pretty good legislation on making sure that our emissions are pretty clean as far as our energy production goes. So a lot of what we get in our pollution comes from overseas where we have no control. So the best thing that we can do is act local and again, stay diversified. One thing I would like to see is replacing methane emissions from our trash by taking some of the coal plants that we're taking out of production and turn them into trash incinerators. Methane is way worse than CO2 as far as a greenhouse gas goes. That way we could get some free electricity from our trash, improve our environment, improve our energy situation. It'd be a win-win for everybody.
Time there, sir. Mr. Womack, 1 minute.
So I'm not a climate change denier at all. I'm not a scientist. I do recognize that there is a great discussion going on about climate change. But the last thing we want to do, and I hate to keep coming back to energy, but it is something that's very important to everyday Arkansans, and that is that we have the ability to produce energy right here, domestic energy, and we do it in a much cleaner, much more responsible way than places around the globe. This administration, however, they're begging the Saudis not to cut production. They want more production. They're begging the Venezuelans to bring more production. None of that helps the climate. Look, if you're going to change the paradigm on climate change from an energy perspective, I think Americans have the ability to do it best. The last thing I would say is I'm a big proponent of nuclear energy. We have a nuclear power plant right here in the that formerly was in third District of Arkansas over at London. And I think we need more of that kind of energy to reduce the carbon footprint and bring about a sustainable grid.
Ms. Mallett-Hays, 1 minute.
Again, even though he's not denying climate change, he has not put his energy into creating plans and solutions to be progressive. I do not like to live in a world where we have to be regressive and try to play catch up with the problems that we're seeing. We know climate change is a problem. It is here now. We have got to take all of our eggs out of one basket and diversify our energy in ways of making solar energy more affordable and accessible to the average everyday person, making electric vehicles more accessible, improving our public transportation and our railway system so that we can decrease the amount of 18-wheelers we're seeing on our roadways and still being able to move our goods throughout the United States while reducing our footprint.
Mr. Kalagias, you have another 30 seconds, sir.
A lot of people say that we need to move more to solar and wind, and it's not really a thing. So when we shut down some plants to replace them with solar and wind, what we're really replacing them with is natural gas. And so we've seen our natural gas use shoot up. That has caused our electric bills to go up because our electric is now off natural gas and the price of natural gas has shot up. So my electric bill has doubled. So that's not a good way to diversify. All we're doing is we're shifting our pollution burden from one place to another. So we do need more diversification. Nuclear is one small part of that option, but the more diversified we can get, then the more reliable our grid will be and the cleaner our energy will be.
Mr. Womack.
Well, I'm sure my Democrat opponent kind of subscribes, probably at least the way she talks, to the California model. It says, by 2035, we're just not going to have any internal combustion engine cars running on fossil fuels. So this notion that we're going to take our eggs all out of one basket and diversify, look, their policy is pretty simple. Ours is pretty simple. We're an all of the above energy solution party. Theirs is an all but one. Look, there's room for all of them. We need to proceed.
Got to call it. Ms. Mallett-Hays.
Yeah, no, I disagree. I'm very aware of the problems that the California system is seeing, but that doesn't mean that we don't move forward with trying to improve what we're doing now. We cannot continue to preach fossil fuel, fossil fuel, fossil fuel, and do nothing to improve the systems that we can reduce our footprint in the future.
Next question goes first to Mr. Womack. Sir, we read that there is a movement underway in your conference, caucus, Republican conference, to hold the budget hostage, the debt ceiling hostage, to cuts in entitlement programs, particularly Social Security and Medicare. And if you don't get concessions, just let it crash. Do you subscribe to that approach, and is that responsible governance?
Well, we're going to face it. But there's going to be something else that will happen before we get there. First of all, you have to understand that we have an election, a midterm election that we have to get through to determine who the new majority will be and who will have the gavels and the ability to propose legislation in the next Congress. And I hope we do. The first thing we have to do is we have to finish our work from 2022. We have a funding bill for FY23 that is still pending. We're funded through the middle part of December. We've got to go back in the lame duck and figure out how to fund the government through the end of the fiscal year, and that will be the first thing. Then, assuming that we flip in the midterms and the House is in Republican hands, then I think we have to use the debt ceiling as a means to get some leverage on budget process reform. We can't continue to deal with CRs and omnibus packages and threats of a government shutdown. What we need to do is pay our bills and then focus on a process that works for the American people and can do it on time.
Ms. Mallett-Hays.
That's actually the first I've heard of that, but I would highly hope that that is not the case. It is not fair to hold the American people hostage when it is our elected officials that have not been able to get the job done there in the United States Congress. So if we're going to hold anybody hostage, we need to be holding them hostage by reducing or eliminating their pay until they can get things funded.
Mr. Kalagias, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, it hasn't really mattered whether the Republicans or Democrats have been in control. I know Mr. Womack was saying we have to wait until we know who's going to have power. And the parties aren't supposed to have power in Congress. The people are supposed to have power in Congress. This is a country of we the people, not we the parties. So we shouldn't be waiting to see who's going to have power. We should be giving the people the power. The people that have paid into Social Security deserve to be paid. We need to do whatever we can to the rest of the budget to make sure that they're paid what they were owed because they paid into it. That's going to mean a lot of cuts somewhere. That means someone's going to have to stand up and lead the charge on that, not say, well, the party did this, or my party did that, or it's the other party's fault. So we need people to start taking blame on themselves and taking credit for themselves for the work that they do themselves. Mr. Womack isn't the representative of the Republican Party. He's a representative of the people of the 3rd District. I'm running to be a representative for the people of the 3rd District. So those are the people that need us working for them, not the parties. I think that's, if we can fix that focus, we'd have a much easier time fixing the rest of these issues.
Mr. Womack, so default is an option?
Let me just say it again. We need to pay our bills. I think most of the people that I represent in the 3rd District of Arkansas do not believe in creating a sovereign debt crisis. But at the same time, we can't, that's the definition of insanity. Continue to raise the debt ceiling, continue to spend, like drunken sailors, and then turn around and have to do it all over again. We need something in return for elevating the debt ceiling of the United States so that we can pay our bills, and that would be some kind of process reform, budgetary reforms that can bring us back closer to a balanced budget.
Ms. Mallett-Hays.
Well, most of our congressional leaders have been there 10 to 20 years, so I think at this point we need new leadership that brings new innovative ideas for that to happen.
Mr. Kalagias.
Yeah, he talks about we need to do these things, but when he's been in office, he's done the exact opposite. He's voted for every single debt limit increase. So if we're going to stop spending increased amounts of debt, then we need to not increase the debt limit ceiling. We need to start spending responsibly inside of our limits, which is something that he admits, and he tells us that's what we need to do, but he's never done. He's done the exact opposite while he's been in office. We need servants in Congress, not leaders. We need servants that are going to do the people's work.
Ms. Lee has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Kalagias.
Mr. Kalagias, let's move overseas now to Ukraine and Russia. How is the U.S. handling the current conflict in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, and when it comes to our involvement with the war and with aid?
So let me first say that all the fighting is going on in Ukraine. This isn't an argument over who's responsible. This is the fault of Russia invading Ukraine. The problem is that we don't have the money to help. So we're $31 trillion in debt. We can't afford to try and help fix that. So we're sending a lot of money, we're sending a lot of equipment using money we don't have, which is causing our own nation harm. So that's part of the problem when you run up $31 trillion in debt, is that you don't have the money to do the things that you want to do. So the other thing is it's not really our business. We can't afford to be the world's policeman. It's kind of what caused the Soviet Union to collapse in the first place. The Soviet Union collapsed because they couldn't afford to do all of the foreign stuff that they were doing. All the interference they had overseas bankrupted their nation. We can't afford to let the same thing happen here. What we need to do is get some responsible government so that then when something comes up where we do need to spend money, we have it to spend. In the meanwhile, we do have people, I'm out of time, sorry.
Yeah, I'm afraid, sir. Mr. Womack, you have 1 minute, sir.
I'm not real sure I understand his answer, because on one hand, we don't need to be involved, but on the other hand, the collapse of the Soviet Union was because we're not involved. Fortunately, he was not in charge back in the 1930s and 1940s when World War II was raging in two different fronts. Look, we cannot afford for Eastern Europe to be overrun by an unchecked Vladimir Putin. And he's trying to reclaim exactly what was dissolved in the late 80s, early 90s. So, I support the United States of America helping our allies so that we never have to trigger an Article 5 response in NATO. And I promise you, if he's unchecked, if he's able to take Ukraine, he's going to take Georgia, he's going to take the rest of those former Soviet bloc countries, and he's going to run roughshod over the rest of Europe, and that's something that our country, the rest of the world, just simply cannot afford. So I support our role in helping our friends in Ukraine defend themselves against this brutal dictator.
Ms. Mallett-Hays, 1 minute.
This is actually something I do agree with Mr. Womack on. We have got to keep our relationship strong. We have to ensure that the eastern part of the globe does not crumble under Putin. He has got to be held responsible, and if we do nothing, he will continue to overtake as much of the continent as he can. Without our help, that's what we're going to see, and we're going to be in a much worse crisis than we're in right now following the pandemic. So I also support what Congress has done. I hope that we're able to help them meet a more formidable outcome without having to escalate any further. But there is always that fear of we don't know what Mr. Putin's going to do, and we have to be ready for everything.
Mr. Kalagias, you have 30 seconds, sir.
Yeah, I would just like to remind everybody that our country was attacked in World War II. We were justified in going to war then. Putin hasn't attacked us. So at a certain point, Europe is going to have to be able to solve their own problems because, like I said, we can't afford to be the world's policeman. So it would be nice, but we can't. I would encourage every American to voluntarily contribute as much as they want, but we can't force Americans to contribute. We can't go into debt further in order to do this, or we'll be doing more harm to ourselves than we ever were to Russia.
30 seconds, Mr. Womack.
The geopolitical issues facing the world with an unchecked Putin are just not something that we can live with. And I mean, there are lots of, you see it just like I see it. And our staff has even handled constituent service issues involving our friends in Ukraine. We just simply cannot allow this guy to continue to run roughshod over his former Soviet bloc neighbors. This is a sovereign nation that has been attacked. And as I said, we've got a responsibility to NATO. It's danger close to our NATO countries. I'd never want to see us have to respond in an Article 5 way to an attack on the rest of the NATO bloc.
Ms. Mallett-Hays.
I understand Mr. Kalagias' concern about us spending money that we don't choose to spend to help Ukraine, but that can be said for a lot of our taxes being spent on things that a lot of us don't necessarily agree with. But at the same time, the purpose right now is to prevent any escalation in the current situation that could potentially not only affect the United States, but globally. And I think that's something that we need to continue to be a part of the solution.
We're going to pause our questioning for just a moment to let you know that the candidates can participate in a press conference immediately following the debate, and you can participate as well. As observers anyway, scan the QR code on your screen with your mobile device. Get your phones ready so you'll see that QR code periodically through the balance of our debate. And our next question from Ms. Munoz, and it goes first to Mr. Womack.
To Mr. Womack, yes, this is another viewer question from Garland County. And this viewer says, we are one of 4 states that does not allow online voter registration. Should Arkansas have online voter registration? Mr. Womack.
Well, you know, I guess we should have online voter registration if there's a way to ensure that it's, as many people have said, easy to vote, hard to cheat. And that, I think, is where the rub is. I don't question anything about Arkansas election law at all. You know, the elections in Arkansas in the last election, I thought were executed perfectly. Were there a few hiccups in some places? I guess there always are. The real question is in the details. I think what most people want is I think they want to make sure that the people who are voting in our elections are qualified to vote in our elections. And that those votes are properly counted. And as long as we have a system in place that provides for that level of confidence, then I like exactly what we do in Arkansas and wish maybe and likely that the rest of the country would follow our lead.
Ms. Mallett-Hays.
We are in the 21st century, and we should absolutely be able to online register. It is a shame that people have to go through so many steps to be able to get their vote to count here in the state of Arkansas. There is a system in place, like Mr. Womack was speaking of, because we had to use it to get out or to prevent us from receiving the child tax credit. You had to go in, put all this information. You had a system that you had to take your picture. That system is in place. We can easily transfer that into the state of Arkansas. We could transfer that into all the states to make sure that our elections are safe and that there is no questioning. I don't question at all that our elections were safe, but I definitely do not want to see another 2020 in the future elections. And if we can do that by creating easier to use systems that we can provide identification for people, then I'm all for it.
Mr. Kalagias.
In order to register, you have to show ID that you are who you say you are. You have to show proof of residency, like you've got an electric bill. You got to fill out a form. You can do that online just as easy as you can in person. You can scan an ID, you can scan an electric bill, you can fill out a form online. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't have online voter registration.
30 seconds for follow-up. Mr. Womack.
If it's a fail-safe program, I support it.
Ms. Mallett-Hays.
I think we've hit it all.
And Mr. Kalagias, you have another.
That one's pretty easy.
Okay, our next question, I believe, is from me, and it goes to Ms. Mallett-Hays. There apparently is some, there is legislation now pending, started over on the Senate side, to make nationwide a ban on abortion. This, of course, following the reversal of Roe. Your position?
Honestly, I looked into this one a little bit. Being in a state right now where we have one of the most restrictive laws, I was kind of very intrigued to see if it would open up the access for women in the state of Arkansas, and unfortunately it doesn't. So no, I would not support that legislation. We are setting a terrible precedent by not following the experts' opinions on what's best for females and women in their health care. And we're also telling half of the American population that we don't believe that they're capable of making an informed decision for themselves. On top of that, most of the legislators that are making these laws for us have no idea the mental, emotional, or physical toll that a pregnancy can take on a person.
Mr. Kalagias.
I firmly believe that at the point of conception, a unique new individual life is formed, and that unique person is entitled to all of the rights and all of the protections as every other person. So personally, I don't have any children. My only child died 6 weeks after conception. And that is the most incredibly painful thing that I've ever endured and that I still endure. And I cannot imagine someone going up to someone who has lost a child like that and say, it was just a mass of cells. You've got nothing to grieve. So our courts have already ruled that we can use DNA to identify individual people. And at the point of conception, we have human DNA unique to an individual. It's not the mother, it's not the father. I think our laws need to reflect that. Are there times when someone is authorized to use deadly force against somebody? Yes, there are. And our courts can determine that, and we can determine that at trial. But at the point of conception, you have a unique human life. That life deserves just as much protection as everyone else's.
Mr. Womack, a statutory ban?
Well, look, the Dobbs decision pushed it back to the states. And of course, in Arkansas, has already been discussed, we have a trigger law here, a trigger bill, or a trigger law that goes into effect pursuant to the Dobbs decision. I believe that on issues like this that are so close and so emotional and so emotionally charged, that the best place for those issues to be decided is where the people, closest to the people. That's the way our Constitution was formed. But that said, you know, I support a federal ban on abortions with certain exemptions, you know, certain exceptions. And I've been very clear about that. My pro-life record speaks for itself. But again, the closest we can get these decisions to the people that should decide them, I think, is best for all concerned. And we will see how this plays out in the coming weeks and months.
Follow up, Ms. Mallett-Hays.
Abortion has become this very politicized thing, but when we look at the root of what abortion actually is, it is a medical procedure that is warranted at times, and there is nobody that needs to make that decision besides a female and her medical providers. As a mother of 2 children that will be of childbearing age soon, I hope and I pray that they will always have the ability to make the best decision for them without interference from our government.
Mr. Kalagias.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we're having the wrong argument. This shouldn't be an argument over what medical procedures should or shouldn't be allowed. This is a rights argument. So should all people get equal protection of the law or not? So I believe everyone should get equal protection of the law. That includes our children.
Mr. Womack, 30 seconds.
Nothing else to add other than what I've already said. It's a tough issue. It's going to continue to be debated across our country. And we'll see what the next Congress does insofar as proposing abortion bans and where they play out.
And our next question comes from Ms. Lee, and it goes first to the Congressman.
Congressman Womack, we have been talking a lot about debt, $31 trillion in debt as of today, keeps sticking up. So to you, what is wasteful spending and where can we cut first?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I'm an appropriator, so every day in my office I have people that come and lobby me for money for something. And some of these are really heartwarming issues, and others, you know, are maybe down the list a little bit. But to me, we just have to have a national conversation, and a budget would help to be able to get both sides together, do a budget resolution that demonstrates these are the needs, these are the resources with which to meet those needs, and be able to scale those down to size so that we can at least get to a balanced budget and not be contributing to a $31 trillion debt. The challenge we have right now is that we are in excess of $1 trillion in deficit every year. The discretionary budget of the U.S. government by itself is just $1.5 trillion. So if you try to cut $1 trillion, in the deficit, you can't do it without getting into the entitlement program. So I think a national conversation and agreement that we need to get a strategy in place is of the utmost importance.
Ms. Mallett-Hays.
So without having the access like Congressman Womack does to everything, the breakout of what we're spending money on, my priorities would definitely be the programs that give the most benefit to the most Arkansans and Americans. However, as he's talking about that 1.5 million, I would like to remind everybody that we added 1.7 trillion by the 2017 tax cuts that we gave to the wealthy. Obviously, that in hindsight was not a good for our deficit, and we're going to have to make that up on top of the new spending that we've been doing to keep people with roofs over their houses and food on their table.
Mr. Kalagias.
We're hearing people we need to cut, but every time we bring up a spending measure, everyone says, well, we can't cut that. So, and we've heard, well, we need to get both sides to agree on something. Well, we've had sides splitting power, we've had the sides having power to themselves, and there hasn't been any agreement on that. There's not going to be any agreement on that unless we start doing something different. If we're going to do something different, it means we have to start voting different. So get it to where there's not both sides. So if we can get it to where no party has power in Congress, and you'll need 3 at least to do that, then we can get it to where people actually have to make those decisions. They can't just go on party lines. So that's what I'm offering. I'm offering a chance at change. Because saying, well, we need to do this and we'll have to find a way to agree, it's not going to happen. It hasn't happened. They've been saying that for 20 years. So he's been in office for 12 years. It hasn't happened. It's not going to happen unless we do something different.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Womack, you have another 30 seconds.
I'm one of 435 people in the House of Representatives. That does not wield just a tremendous amount of power, I would admit. And it's, by the way, it's trillion, not million. And the 1.7 trillion you referenced in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, let me just remind everybody watching this program tonight, in 2022, we collected more money than in the history of this country. So we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. She wants to tax and spend more. I think we need less government, less spending, and more of an approach toward balancing the books of the federal government.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Mallett-Hays, you have another 30 seconds.
None of the solutions I've offered or anything I've talked about has talked about increasing taxes on everyday American citizens. I will revert back to we need an overhaul of all of the systems to figure out how we can cut spending on inefficient processes that are clunky and not easy to use.
Mr. Kalagias, you have 30 seconds, sir.
Part of the problem we're going to have to fix is that we do have this automatic spending, this non-discretionary spending where you don't get to say. Congress did that on their own. Congress is the one that decided, well, we're not going to give ourselves a say. Congress can fix that and say, we're going to give ourselves a say.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And he has admitted that we need to cut spending, that we do have a spending problem, and that is true. We do have a spending problem. The problem is that he hasn't done anything to address the spending problem. We keep spending more and more and more money, no matter who's in power. When he had the presidency as Republicans, when Congress was Republicans, they still trillion-dollar deficits, record amounts of revenue.
All right, Ms. Munoz has another question, and this one goes first to Mr. Womack.
Mr. Womack.
I'm sorry, Ms. Mallett-Hays.
Ms. Mallett-Hays, yes, that's okay. So let's talk about the healthcare industry. They have taken quite a hit. They are continuing to struggle throughout the pandemic as we're still on the heels of it. What would be some of your solutions to help all the hospitals and clinics in Arkansas and specifically within your district, Ms. Mallett-Hays?
As a healthcare worker, I see firsthand daily the struggles we have due to the shortages, post-pandemic, the overworked, underpaid employees that we have. I know my opponent was part of a group of legislators that sent a letter to the pandemic head of the pandemic response team and wanted them to look into travel nursing. And unfortunately, there were so many hospitals that needed travel nursing because we are not paying our nurses what they're worth. So how do we create ways that our healthcare providers are able to pay our nurses so that they can retain their staff? That is a huge problem our healthcare industry is facing right now. We also have to make sure that in those shortages that we're not losing healthcare opportunities in our rural communities. We know that they're the first ones to see their services decline when we have a healthcare shortage and a funding issue. So we have to make sure that they're at the forefront of our thoughts while we're making plans.
Mr. Kalagias, you have 1 minute, sir.
We were having healthcare issues long before the pandemic started. The biggest issue is there simply aren't enough healthcare professionals. There aren't enough doctors, there aren't enough nurses, so you're going to have money chasing too few people, which is going to inflate the cost. So there is a lot of travel nurses where people are traveling because they can get paid more money that way, and more power to them that they are going to get paid for their skills. So yes, that is going to leave places that don't have enough people. It's because there weren't enough people. The reason you have travel nurses is because they're traveling to a place that didn't have enough people. So some of that's going to take a while to fix. It takes a while to train a doctor. It takes a while to train a nurse. And we're going to have to fix a lot of our broken down education system to fix that. So there is no easy answer for that one. The second issue is funding. We spend federal funding on healthcare about $1.5 trillion a year, and half of that goes to administrative costs. It goes to administering the healthcare programs, not into actual healthcare itself. So that's another area where we need to get the government out of the way so that we can actually make a good use of the money that we have, so that it's going to actually solve the problems and not just create more bureaucracy.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Womack, you have 1 minute.
Well, I have a record on health care. I'm the only person up here because of my position. I've had an opportunity to actually address the accessibility of health care. We put lots of money in appropriations bill language, which is the committee I serve on, and for graduate medical education, because we do have a provider shortage. Everybody knows that. And I have personally asked for money in appropriation bills over the last 2 years to provide better nursing assistance at Arkansas Tech University, Russellville campus, Ozark campus. And then ask Jim Rollins up at the Northwest Technical Institute. He's got a bold plan up there to deal with some of the shortages in our nursing programs and an expansion of the campus at NTI. And we've advocated for money for that program. We recognize that we have a shortage. And it's only satisfying that shortage that is going to stop us from people going around the country gouging people because there is a shortage of nurses, and the traveling nurses can go out there and charge exorbitant rates for the services that they provide, which is the primary purpose of what that letter was about, to prevent the very price gouging she talked about earlier in this conversation.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Mallett-Hays, you have 30 seconds.
While the funding that Mr. Womack has secured has been great for the training purposes of healthcare providers, the biggest problem is retention. And we're not going to retain them with the cost of education that they're having to face on top of the interest rates that they're seeing with student loan debts. And we're also not going to retain them if we cannot pay them a livable wage. They're not going to stay in this area, and they're going to find where they can make a livable wage to support their families.
Mr. Kalagias, 30 seconds.
Yeah, once again, God bless the people that are leaving to get enough money to pay them for what they're worth. Calling them evil and saying they're gouging people because they're going to get the money that they deserve, that's not an answer to the problem. An answer to the problem is, in fact, training more people that are capable of doing the job. And it's not just expanding someplace at a community college or at a different college. It's K-12. We need to improve the quality of education so that there are people that are capable of going to those schools and coming out as quality professionals.
Mr. Womack, 30 seconds.
Yeah, some of these issues are going to be solved with a better approach to how we educate our kids. And we're doing a better job of that in the 3rd District. The Peak Innovation Center at Fort Smith, Arkansas, some of the other expanded facilities around the 3rd District that are helping educate young kids coming through high school as to what the other, shall we say, programs are out there that they could enter into, even perhaps without a college degree. Just get that training locally so that they can go right into the workforce and not incur a lot of student loan debt, and instead start making a livable wage right off the bat.
Well, the clock is talking to us, to our candidates and to we panelists, and we're captive to it. And the clock is telling us that we are out of time for any more of the debate. And now we are going to closing statements. Mr. Kalagias, you go first.
To sum up, most of the problems that we've been talking about are not new. We've been talking about these same problems for a decade or longer. So we haven't seen any solutions come from Congress. We've seen the problem get worse. We need to do something different. So you cannot keep doing the same things and expect different results. That is insanity. And that's what we've been doing. We alternate whether we vote for Democrats or whether we vote for Republicans, and we keep getting the same results because there's not much of a difference between the two when it comes down to what they actually vote for and what they actually do. So we need to change that. We need to change by voting for independents, by voting for third parties, And I realize that that's tough for some people. It's something different. But different is exactly what we need. The problem is that we haven't had that difference. We need to take that chance, go out and vote for something different so that we can actually see something different happen in D.C.
Ms. Mallett-Hays, you have 1 minute to close.
I am running to be the next Congresswoman of District 3 because I believe in community. I grew up in a small rural community in Northwest Arkansas where I say your neighbors became your friends and then they became your family. That's the type of community I want my children and all Arkansans to know. Our current representative touts that he knows what the 3rd Congressional District needs, yet he's been in office for 12 years and has only had one bill passed into law for a commemorative coin. He doesn't care about the people who are struggling to put food on the table and a roof over their head. He doesn't care about the food insecure neighbors that we have all throughout our district. He doesn't care about the shortages we're seeing in education labor and service worker labor. He doesn't care about the burnout that our healthcare workers are seeing, or that parents really are concerned about their children getting the best education no matter where they live in the district. If he cared about all of those things, he would have been working on legislation over the last 12 years that addressed all Arkansans. I don't have to tell you how bad of a job he's done because his track record will do that for me, but I can tell you as your next Congresswoman, I will fight tirelessly to rebuild our communities and bring a voice back to the 3rd Congressional District.
Mr. Womack, to you now for a close. 1 minute, sir.
Well, let me just take my remaining time to thank Arkansas PBS for this forum. This is a great opportunity for us to have a robust debate, talk about the issues that are important not only to our state, but certainly to our district and the nation. I want to thank these two people up here. I want to thank my opponent on the Democrat side, Ms. Mallett-Hays and Mr. Kalagias, for their willingness to put their name on the ballot and run for public office and to be a representative of the people. I want to thank my staff. I want to thank my constituent service team. We talked a lot about issues up here. We didn't say anything about how a congresswoman or a congressman deals with the constituents across the myriad of issues facing them at the federal bureaucracy level. And I've got a team of just superb people that work every day tirelessly for their benefit. So I do care about the people that I represent. So thank you to everyone. This has been an honor and a privilege to serve for the last 12 years, and I look forward to Election Day and an opportunity to do it again.
To all three of you, we thank you one more time. And of course, our audience as well. You can watch this one and all the other Arkansas PBS debates on demand at the Arkansas PBS YouTube channel, on the PBS video app, and on our website. The candidates have, as we mentioned, the option to participate in a press conference that's directly following the debate, which will air on our YouTube as part of our live stream. Scan the QR code on your screen and start watching YouTube right now. Thanks again to our candidates, as always to you for watching, and to all of those who've hosted us here at the Reynolds Performance Hall at UCA. Election Day, November 8th. Thank you.
Major funding for Election 2022 Arkansas PBS Debates is provided by AARP Arkansas, with additional funding provided by the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce.
We both down here, I guess, today, huh?
When you turn that TV off.
Do I need to scooch down so that...
No, we'll get it.
I got one executioner.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just maybe a throwback interview, Northwest Arkansas.
We are ready whenever you are.
Everybody good? You good? If you just want to start just by recapping how you thought the debate went, your performance specifically.
This one was a little different than previous ones. Previous ones we get to do an opening statement. This one just went straight to the questions. I think I like that better. It gives more time to get more questions in.
And, you know, as a libertarian in this race, I know that over the last several election cycles, more libertarians have jumped into it. Can you talk about the challenges when facing an incumbent in a supermajority Republican state like this?
Yeah, it's tough for anybody who's not a Republican to win a race in Arkansas. It's harder when you're a third-party candidate. You know, I had to sue the state just so that I could get on the ballot, plus petition so that I could get on the ballot. So it's harder for libertarians, not just because we're a third party and people kind of don't pay that much attention to third parties because they think only the two parties matter. So it is hard, but we are growing. We had a record number of candidates this year, which is that's good. I like to see a trend going up. Unfortunately, I think the reason that we see a lot more people that are willing to say that they're libertarian and run as libertarians is because things have gotten so bad. It's one of those, you know, seriously, how bad do things have to get before you do vote libertarian? And so more people are coming that way just because things have gotten so bad. And people are realizing that it hasn't mattered whether it was the Democrats in charge or the Republicans in charge. Nothing really changes. So people are hurting because of inflation. People are hurting because their wages can't keep up. People are hurting because economic activity is starting to slow. I mean, no one wants to call it an actual recession, but it's 2 straight quarters with negative GDP, and the future doesn't look very good on that front either. So I think people are saying that, and they're starting to say, well, maybe we do need to do something different, and the Libertarians is the only other option in town in Arkansas to do something different.
Did you think that you were able to touch on all the topics that you wanted to talk about, or were there some other things you wish would have been touched on?
There's always other things you'd like to talk about in an hour where someone else is picking the topics. I mean, everything's limited. You're only allowed, you know, a minute and then a 30-second rebuttal. So it's hard to address everything you want to address. I could spend days, you know, talking about all the different issues, but no one wants to listen to me for days. I don't want to listen to me for days. So we did talk about a pretty wide variety of topics, so I'm glad we got to do that. Like I said, I think leaving the opening remarks off this time around probably helped with that, being able to get some more topics out there. But yeah, I would like to see, you know, more people involved. I'd like to see this whole room full of reporters asking me questions so that we could, I mean, even ask me stuff that I hadn't even thought about or considered that was going to be asked.
I'll just keep going since there's nobody else in here, I guess. Whenever you talk to, you know, traditional Womack voters in this state who, you know, they've continued to vote for him through each election cycle, what do you say to them, you know, in your mind that you think may sway them to vote for you when election day comes around?
I found a lot of people that don't like him, that don't really want to vote for him, but they feel like they don't have a choice because they think that voting for third party is wasting their vote. And I try and tell them it's not. I mean, the only wasted vote is the one that you don't cast, or the one that you cast for someone that you don't believe in. So I think if everybody that said, well, I have to vote for a Republican or I have to vote for a Democrat because a third party is just going to steal a vote, if all those people voted for that third party candidate, third party candidates would win in overwhelming numbers. It would be landslides. That's the biggest issue that I have. Some of the other issues I have is that people just aren't aware of what's actually going on. They hear, you know, a 15-second soundbite, and that's all the knowledge they have. So I would like to see the people take more of an interest in exactly what's going on, and then they'd be able to make a more informed choice, or even still voting for a person beyond me or beyond libertarians, they'd at least know what's going on and be able to tell their congressman, whoever that was, or congresswoman, whoever that is, hey, this is wrong. We need to change the way we're doing that. That was one of the great things I think about the Ross Perot presidency. And I didn't vote for Ross Perot, and I don't know that he would have been a very good president. But when he ran for president, he got enough votes. He had no impact at all on who won the election. He certainly didn't win the election. He didn't get any electoral votes. But he had a huge impact on the government because he came out with, we can't keep spending this money. That was his biggest issue, was we can't keep spending this money. And after he loses the election, but he did it by gaining so many votes that he couldn't be ignored, we got as close as we've come since 1957 to having a balanced budget. I mean, that was all Ross Perot without winning an election. So I'd like to see more of that too. I mean, your voice matters. Even if you don't think there's enough votes for a third-party candidate to get them to win, all you got to do is give them enough votes so that there's some influence, so that they can spark the debate, so that they can get people to pay attention to actual policies and getting stuff done. How many more minutes do I have?
You have 4 minutes and 28 seconds.
I have tons of minutes.
4 minutes and 28 seconds, I guess.
What about a question from the cameraman? Somebody from the audience, give me a question.
Is there anything else you'd like to say that you didn't get to say in the debate?
I think a lot of people say, well, we can just, maybe if we quit wasting money on certain things. And there is a lot of waste that needs to get cut. But we need to look at big issues too, because there's not enough there to cut. We need to cut about $3 trillion a year from our spending. That's a lot. So, and we need to redefine what waste is. I mean, we spend $1.5 trillion just on healthcare, except that we're only spending about $700 billion on healthcare. The rest of it we're spending on healthcare administration or management. So if you get the government out of the way, you're not wasting all that money on management. In the military, we have $700, $800 billion that we spend a year on the military, but we're buying ships that don't work. We have airplanes that don't work. We buy things that are airplanes that have reduced capabilities that lower our military capabilities. But people don't want to say, well, you can't cut funding to the military. Well, yeah, you can. You're not cutting it to the people, to the soldiers that are serving, to the sailors that are serving. You need to quit spending it on the contractors that are making all the money, on equipment that doesn't work. In the 1970s, an aircraft carrier had strike aircraft that could go 2,000 miles and deliver a full load of bombs 2,000 miles away from that aircraft carrier. Now, our strike capability of our aircraft carriers is only 500 miles away, and they can deliver 2 bombs per airplane. That's it. So, I mean, our own Congress has done more to threaten our national security than any foreign nation has. So we need to look at what are we calling waste, what are we calling important, because most of what the government spending is, it's waste. It's corporate welfare for the people that are making the campaign contributions. And when Congress people say that this is what we're spending it on, it's for this, don't you care about these people? That's not what they're spending it on. So I know I'm in the VA. The VA is a mess. It is an absolute mess. I have not been able to see a primary care provider in over a year and a half. So I haven't been able to see a cardiologist that knows what's going on with my heart in over a year, because they don't have enough doctors to see all the patients. But we're not fixing that. The money that we're spending in the VA, and we spend more and more money on the VA, it goes to building more buildings that we don't have doctors for. So it also goes to people that administer programs for the VA instead of actual in the VA itself. Congress passed a bill that said that we're going to have assumed disabilities. If you served in a certain area and you have these disabilities, we're going to assume that service connected. You don't have to prove it. So people that have those disabilities that served in that area say, okay, I want to do that. Well, they don't just give it to you. And they don't accept your VA record that says that, yes, you do have those disabilities. They send you to a private contractor whose job it is to kind of referee and filter and prevent the vets from getting the benefits that they deserve. And then they say, well, you still didn't prove it was service connected. Well, you're not supposed to. But even though the legislators say that that's what it is, that's not what the law actually says. And that's been happening since Agent Orange back in Vietnam. It's still happening now with stuff that went on in the Persian Gulf. or in Afghanistan and Iraq. So the government says it's doing something. What they're doing is the exact opposite. That's something we need to change. And once again, the best way to change that is get rid of the people that have been in power, which is actually the parties that have been in power. We don't need the Republican National Committee to have all this power. We don't need the Democrat National Committee to have all this power. The way we do that is make sure that neither one of those parties has a majority in Congress. The way we have to do that is vote for someone different. I imagine that used up my 4 minutes.
You got 10 seconds left.
Oh, okay.
For being here.
Everybody good? You just wanted to start, talk a little bit about the debate itself. How do you think it went overall, and what did you think about your performance?
Yeah, I thought it was fine. I was excited that we got to cover a lot of topics. It was a little bit more condensed in some of the ones that I've seen, so we were able to cover a lot more bases, and I think it did fine. I think we have to call out and hold people accountable that have been in Congress for a long time and haven't made the changes that we need to see for our country to move forward. And so I didn't have any problem doing that.
Were you happy with the topics that were discussed, or were there some other things that you would have hoped were touched on?
Yeah, no, I think they did a really good job. I think the only thing I would have wanted to talk about just a little bit, being from the healthcare world and industry, we have made healthcare more accessible, but it's not affordable. And so being able to talk about plans for making that a little bit more affordable for all Arkansans and Americans would have been a good topic to discuss.
As a Democrat on the campaign trail in a supermajority state like Arkansas, going up against an incumbent like Steve Womack, who's been there for so long, what are some challenges that you found that you face whenever you are on the campaign trail dealing with those issues?
Well, we'll hear over and over again that Arkansas is a red state. And if we actually look at the history, we didn't totally turn red until 2010. We used to be a fairly blue state. But at the end of the day, we are a non-voting state, and we've worked really hard to get people registered and make them informed about not only the issues, but the candidates that are on their ballots that they can vote for in order to kind of tackle this supermajority. Do we think it's going to happen all during this cycle? No, but we're definitely putting in the groundwork to ensure that in the future we can continue to elect officials that care about Arkansans and actually want to do the job instead of being there for the fame and notoriety.
Let's say that you do get elected. What would be, I guess, that first month your schedule would look like? What would be some things that you would want to start to do immediately in that role?
Yeah, so I had touched on the OT40, definitely tackling inflation and how we can reduce some of how the Arkansans are feeling that, looking at how we can make that bill a reality. Also looking into the healthcare options. I would love to see a Medicare Bridge program where we offer it on the marketplace at cost, and also allow for corporations and businesses to offer it as a option in their insurance realm to help drive down costs and make things a little bit more competitive, because we're seeing a monopoly in a lot of these industries.
What are your thoughts on issue 4? I know that that's something that I don't think was touched on in the debate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually support it. We have seen, once we approved for medical marijuana here in the state, the tax revenues that we've been able to receive from that has been very beneficial for the state. I know depending on who is elected governor, we could be seeing income tax reductions, which is great. I think that would be great for Arkansans, but how do we make sure that we don't start to go into a deficit in the state right now when we have a surplus? And we know that the revenues that we could bring in from marijuana on a normal basis could be astronomical.
I know that you've talked about the problems with monopolies and some of the other industries, even in just a second ago when we were talking. I know some folks who support recreational marijuana are against issue 4 because they worry about the monopolization of recreational marijuana. Is that something that you've thought about?
A little bit, and I do know that there are some reservations with this particular bill, and I am listening. However, I feel like if we don't see a change in our legislature, the makeup of that, this may be the only opportunity we have to get this passed in the near future. I want to say we pass it now, and then we go in and we work on fixing the problems with the bill to make sure that that doesn't occur. But also because I would like to see that. I think one of those main problems that I have seen people talk about is that this bill doesn't retroactively get rid of some of the incarcerations that we're seeing because of the marijuana use and people that have been arrested for that. And I definitely would want to see that added because we're over incarcerating people in the state of Arkansas at an astronomical rate. And we are starting to spend government money, especially in Washington and Benton County. This next cycle, they're voting on whether they want to increase their taxes to improve or increase the state or the county jails. And we could eliminate a lot of the need for that by approving this passage of this bill.
What does your campaign schedule look like from now until November?
Honestly, this was the last big hurdle. The rest of the time, I'm just going to continue to be out talking to voters. They need to know who's on their ballot, and the only way we can do that is having face-to-face conversations. So I'll be out and about in the community. I do still work, though, in the healthcare world, so I also have a work schedule.
I know I asked you about what you would do, if you won the election, what the schedule looked like. Let's say that, Congressman Womack wins again in this election. What would be your plan moving forward?
The people of Arkansas have always been my priority, and my community has always been my priority. I was an educator prior to being a healthcare worker, and so whatever I do will always be to give back to the people of Arkansas. I definitely will stay in the political world. I think it's important that we recruit people that care about Arkansans to run. We've got to give people the type of people they want to see running for office. If we don't, we're going to keep getting the same of what we've gotten the last couple of years. So I'll definitely stay involved. It has taken a lot of time away from my family, and I have 3 kids. So my mama heart's a little bit sad with the amount of time that I've missed with them. So I don't know that I would run for this position again immediately, but definitely in the future, that might be an option.
We have 4 minutes. If there's anything else you want to say, you're welcome to, or we can wrap it up.
No, I'm good. Thanks, guys.
If you just wanted to start by talking a little bit about the debate itself, what did you think of it, and what did you think about your performance of the debate?
I've done this many times, and it's one of them. It's same kind of format, maybe a few little tweaks here and there. But I do want to start by correcting the record a little bit. It was during the closing arguments. I had already kind of thought in my mind, I want to thank a lot of people for what they do, because they don't, unsung heroes, not people like me, it's my staff and it's Arkansas PBS and the voters, and I just want to thank them. But when my opponent started off on this whole tangent about Steve Womack's ineffective because he's only got one bill signed into law, I want to correct some record here. It demonstrates her lack of understanding how Congress works. When I went to Congress, I had a chance to get on some of these authorizing committees, but no, I wanted to be an appropriator. I wanted to be a difference maker. And I knew the Appropriations Committee, it's an A committee in Congress for a reason, because nothing happens on the discretionary side of the budget unless Congress approves appropriation bills. And so across the spectrum of 12 appropriation bills, I've had a hand in influencing the outcomes that have benefited not only our state and nation, but 3rd District Arkansans specifically. So everything from language, reauthorizing 12-foot channel on the MCARNs that I don't think she would even begin to understand the importance to the economy, to things like money for I-49, XNA, Camp Jack in Harrison, a sewer project in Yellville, a park in Goshen, an SLS campus in Fayetteville. I could talk ad nauseum about the number of things that we've been able to do through the language that we put in appropriation bills that help my district, our state, and our nation. You don't have to have your name on a bill for it to be something that's truly effective for the people you serve. And I talked a little bit about my constituent service record. I'll put it up against anybody's. I didn't talk at all about the Service Academy program that we've instituted that I would rank as high as anybody in Congress. And I got 7 kids right now as freshmen at West Point. So, I mean, we cover the spectrum of things that are expected when people elect a 3rd District congressman. And so I wanted that record corrected. And let me just say this about the one bill that did get signed into law by President Obama, the Marshals Museum. You don't have anybody down there complaining about it. That produced about $4 million of revenue for a very important destination quality national museum for the U.S. Marshal Service. And so we do a lot of things that maybe don't show up in the box score that she chose to assail here today.
I know that in previous election cycles, just considering Arkansas being the supermajority Republican state that it is, we've seen some incumbents who have decided not to engage in some of these debates. Can you talk about what went into the decision on your end to go ahead and come down here and take part in the debate?
This is the only debate I do. It's because I believe in Arkansas PBS. I used to serve on the subcommittee of appropriations that funds the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So I've had an up-close and personal relationship with the old AETN, Arkansas PBS, as it's known today. And I didn't get a chance to say it, but I'll say it here, that what Arkansas PBS did during the pandemic was extraordinary. The role that they played in helping bridge the gap that we had in education, K-12 education, was profound in my view. And I know it firsthand because I had my first grade and kindergartner, then first grade grandson at our house many of those days, my wife helping him using the Arkansas PBS system to enhance his education. So I wanted to congratulate them. But look, I think it's important to have a robust debate on issues. The structures of some debates are not really conducive to, it's weighted toward one side or the other. But this one here is a balanced one. Steve does a great job moderating. The panelists do a great job in asking relevant questions. So it's one that I will always participate in.
I know that one of the big topics was balancing the budget, fiscal concerns, inflationary concerns. Something that I've seen that's a criticism to people who are saying that at this point is that it wasn't a topic that was brought up in 2017 with the big tax cut bill. What's your response to people who have that challenge?
All right, so where it concerns budgets, and we're $1 trillion out of balance every year because we just don't have enough revenue coming in to support all the demand, particularly on the mandatory side of spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, net interest on the debt. But I always kind of put my mayor's hat back on. My plan when I got elected mayor in 1998 in Rogers was to get government out of the way, focus on a growth model where we could grow our economy, our retail and hospitality infrastructure, and then use the proceeds that we collect from retail sales taxes to be able to finance that government. It's got a healthy balance sheet today. It's thriving, and it's because we got government out of the way, and we empowered the local developers to do their thing, and then created the kind of quality of place with trails and recreational facilities and those kinds of things where people want to live there. And now you got 30+ people today moving into the area. And a lot of them are settling in the Rogers area. And I promise you, a lot of them that don't are shopping in the Rogers area. And that happened as a result of the growth model that we put in place when I was mayor. So I think America needs a growth model. There's 3 basic fundamental ways to change the trajectory of government, the government balance sheet. You can cut expenses, that's one way. You can increase taxes, increase your revenue, that's a totally different subject. Or you can have a growth model where you build your economy, you collect more sales taxes, you create more jobs and opportunities, and then you finance all of the systems that are required, the resources required to give back to the citizens all of the expectations of their government, whether it's parks or streets or sewage and drainage and those kinds of things. And I think America needs that growth model. We have to have a serious conversation about the structure of the entitlement programs, because 10,000 people a day are entering those programs. 10,000 people today aged into Social Security and Medicare. And so the number of people going into those programs is going higher. They are living longer, so they're in those programs longer, and we just simply can't afford the promises that we've made. So we have to do something. And there's a lot of options out there. There's a revenue option. There's a cut option, trim the program or put some limitations on the program. But I also think that we have a serious imbalance on the number of people that are working, paying into those programs versus what we had, say, 20, 30 years ago. At one point in time, we had 30 people for every beneficiary in Social Security, 30 people working for every beneficiary. Today, it's about 2.5 people working. I have long said that a job is the elixir that will cure a lot of the ails of a struggling program financially. So when people get jobs with livable wages, they are productive, they're not taking from the social safety net program, and they're paying into those programs that they will enjoy later and give them long-term sustainability. Right now, we have a lot of people that aren't in the workforce that should be in the workforce. And there's not a place that I go in the 3rd District of Arkansas where people aren't saying, I could do more if I just could find the help. And it's just not there. So we've got a lot of work to do to get more people in the workforce, to create the kind of revenue stream that can finance a lot of the expectations of people.
I know that a lot of people have left the workforce because the wages that they were making were not allowing them to have, sort of a very good quality of life. What do you think needs to go into higher wages for people to be able to pay for rent, food, housing, et cetera?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do, but I think we're doing a lot of it in Northwest Arkansas. We are training people, particularly those in the CTE field. And I talked a little bit about this on stage today, that, the Peak Innovation Center, I brought attention to it, but there are others in some of our high schools and over at the 4-county consortium over at Berryville that are allowing young kids today in that 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade class range to be able to go get some technical skills, some certificates, some credentialing, and then enter the workforce with pretty good high-paying jobs, filling a great need. But it is a consortium because we have local industry participating in it. We have our local educators participating in it. And in many cases, they're earning college credit for some of this activity as well. So I think we're doing a pretty good job on that front. I also believe that quality of place is important. And when I talk about quality of place, again, mayor's hat back on, what are the things that bring people to your area? We got abundant natural scenic beauty. That's already organic to our region. But we got to have, low crime. We've got to have good K-12 education. We have to have really good health care to include specialty care, cancer treatment, those kinds of things. And we're developing that. You got to be able to move people. You have to have infrastructure. And when they flush the commode, you've got to have a place for that effluent to go responsibly so that you protect your environment. And we're doing a pretty good job in our region, I think, of managing through the growth spiral that we're having right now. But that means a lot more people are going to be coming here. And as Mallett-Hays said earlier, we're going to have 1 million people here in another 20 years. And right now it's, what about 550, 600,000? So imagine that many more people and the challenges it's going to put on our infrastructure. I've always had a, kind of an idea as a mayor that the ability to move people in and out conveniently without bumper-to-bumper traffic like you see in Southern California, to be able to deal with all of the challenges that this growth model presents, to be able to stay kind of ahead of it or at least keep pace with it, I think is important to us. And in many cases, you're going to need a federal partner to do it. That means your congressman has to be able to go to Washington and advocate for those issues. And I think we do a good job of that.
I know candidates
We're at time, actually. Okay. I'm so sorry for our live stream. Please.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.